Here I am in the Prenzlauer Berg district of what used to be East Berlin. You can see here the old apartment tower style, communist style apartment towers. You see the nice trees, and you can see the older style buildings lining this boulevard. Now, under communism, these boulevards were popular because they were centrally planned, and the boulevards also could roll tanks down them, which is an under commented on part of urban planning, that you need to roll tanks down your boulevard sometimes, so you better make sure they're wide. If you're trying to stop invaders, you make the streets narrow, and it's affected urban planning over the years, and people don't really comment on it. But what I'm really struck with, and that's the first point I wanted to make, is that urban planning sometimes has a militaristic or defensive or a offensive aspect to it, and it's not commented upon, but it's often the case in the final decisions on such things. But what I want you to see is, even though its intent may have been that in some respects, how beautifully tree-lined the street is. And it's got a lovely series of trees, and it's got a nice big tram line in the middle of it running down. And there is definitely a very community feeling in the former East Berlin area, which I think captures somewhat of the spirit of Berlin. So every city has a unique spirit, and when it goes closer to that spirit, and this is my view, which is totally different to many of the books you'll read on urban planning, but my view is that a city should unearth its unique spirit, which comes from the people and comes from the culture, comes from the occupations of the people, comes from the history of the city. And so it's really about unearthing its uniqueness, and that's what city branding or city thinking is unearthing the uniqueness of a city. Trying to be me too and putting in a Ferris wheel when everybody else has got a Ferris wheel, as I think I wrote that article for, I can't remember which journal it was, might have been Place Brand Observer, it might have been another journal, I'm not sure. But I wrote an article about that. Ferris wheels are not a me too, unless you happen to be Prada wheel in Vienna. So, which was the scene of the film The Third Man, I think it was. An Orson Welles film was filmed there, famous one. So when you're in Berlin, you're trying to be Berlin. And I think Berlin, particularly in Ost-Berlin, succeeds in being Berlin. And I think that's one reason why its innovation climate is improving, because the city must try to be itself and just add on some parts to itself and reform itself, or revitalize itself, or develop itself. But it has to come from within. It has to be true to the culture. And the people are responsible for defending that culture against the silliness sometimes of central authorities when they come up with ideas that don't work with the culture of the city. And sometimes the central authorities are responsible for setting the new change in the city, because otherwise things wouldn't change and people might resist change. So it's kind of a balancing act between centralism and decentralization. But certainly there's a feeling or a culture here in Berlin that gives you a sense. And I'm really glad I spent this longer period in Berlin on these two last trips, because this gives me a real sense of what is good about this city and what is so special about the city. It's the people. The people really are quite interesting, and the way they engage with each other is quite warm and friendly at times, even though most Germans will say to me, I love going to Australia because it's so friendly. But Berlin has a certain warmth and interaction to it, and I think it's the differences in cultures, and we imagine things a little bit differently than what they are. So Berlin certainly has many aspects to it, and it's a beautiful day in Berlin just as it's heading into fall. And it's cold, as you can see by my clothes, but it's not too cold. I'm more dressing for later. It'll be colder later, and I'm probably going to be out for quite a while. So anyway, it's a beautiful city, and it has many beautiful attributes. But in terms of city branding, my advice is to be Berlin. And I think Berlin is doing that quite well, better than some cities. So in some ways it might be a case study for those of you who are trying to understand what it takes to be your city. Not to impose an idea from outside as if the city had no soul, but the city does have a soul and does have a centre to it, and it's the soul of the people in that city. So if we want to improve the soul of the city, we have to improve the soul of ourselves. Is that not the case? Anyway, there's some deep philosophical thoughts for you on city branding. Much love, keep innovating. From Berlin, Christopher Hire, Director Data to Think Now.